What's going on, guys? This is Bossrosslp, and welcome to the 2000th video. No, not the 2000th video special, that's coming out soon. This is the 2000th video itself. As in, this is going to be the 2000th video that I've uploaded on YouTube. This is a huge milestone for me. And I had to record this twice, so you can sort of tell that I'm bullshitting a little bit about how happy I am about this, because I had to record this twice. Ooh, man, oh, so fun. But anyway, guys, this is going to be something a little different. This is not a game. This is not a reaction. Oh, it's sort of a reaction, but I'm going to be reading a book today to you guys. Now, you may or may not have ever heard of this man named Onision, or Onisan, I don't know. When I did it the first time, I think I said it was Onisan. However, I think it's Onision, looking back on it. He is a he's a YouTube household name. That is not really a household name. Only a couple select people know him. I think he has about 100,000 subscribers. Don't quote me on that. I actually have not done almost any research on this fellow. He wrote this book called Stones to Abbigale. Now, what a lot of people do say about Onision is that he's a little bit egocentric. I believe I've heard him describe himself as he has a god complex. Like, there's a lot that goes into it. I could be completely wrong, and he might just be a jerk. I don't know. There's a lot that goes really into who Onision is. However, I'm not here today to judge him as a person. I don't really know him. I don't really watch him. What I am here today to judge is that he is not exactly the greatest author, and we're going to read this book today called Stones to Abbigale. And we're pretty much going to have a series of videos where we go through every chapter of this very silly book and pretty much complete it. Now, from reviews are largely positive of this book, and that's because of two reasons. One is that he actually does have a bit of a following. I'm not sure if it's a realistic following. I think there's some people who realistically, truly like his content. And the other reason is that there are people who just like to bullshit on Amazon when I went to buy this book for $10. There were about 8 comments or more, probably more, of people just saying, dude, the part with the raptors and the velociraptors, that was the best part. The fuck? I can't really imagine, looking at this cover, I'm probably going to flash it on screen, that this book has anything to do with dinosaurs. But you know, it could be wrong. I could be wrong. There might be some dinosaurs in this book. It would definitely enhance it. I'm not going to lie. But for right now, let's just read Stones to Abbigale. Without further ado, let's begin. To start off with, from the author. I want to be direct. My name is Greg. I go by Onision online. This book is made up of events that occurred in my own life, mixed with fiction from made-up life of James. James is essentially a better version of myself. His home, his school, and his life all resemble my own, at his age. The people James analyzes and is surrounded by are not so unlike those I've known as well. I have experienced much of the loss James has, however, his happier moments are more often than not also mine. I want to share my story without it being purely non-fiction. I simply felt this approach would make for a far better book. At points I cried while writing this, at others I laughed. Stones to Abbigale is not just a book I wrote, it is a piece of who I am. Special thanks. Lainey, thank you for editing the first draft. Erica, thank you for pointing out 2 word. You've gotta be fucking. Thank you for pointing out 2 word errors. 2? I can't only do 2.
Just 2.
So let's say you made about 200. Because he made about 200. And you're going to see, I'm not going to have a word count for how many errors he makes, guys. But this guy makes a lot of word errors. Alright, let's just begin. Oh boy. Chapter 1. I was asleep until I met her. When I finally woke, I learned the meaning of perfect imperfection. I've always been the type of person to focus on stars as we spin beneath them, the cool breeze on a sunny day, scattered patches of grass under my feet, the world around me, often forgetting to even glance at the one within. I'd remained emotionally unexplored for so much of my life. It's painful knowing some can go an entire lifetime without understanding their own heart, an eternal lock waiting for the right key to change everything. It was the first Monday of November. I opened my eyes, blinded by a recently painted wall-to-wall white room. Even my bed frame, constructed of purely metal, was painted white. It bounced off the walls, causing my eyelids to desperately clamp together. Painting my room like this was a clear act of subtle, self-inflicted psychological torture. I was going through another phase, from darkness to light, and repeat. Seemed like the story of my life. My mom could see the darker colors were depressing me. I felt comforted by them, but found there were good aspects to both extremes. I was happy to visit either side. They are both so simple. But right now, the intense light bouncing from wall to wall felt like it was ripping my mind in two. Trying to open a bottle with one hand is actually harder than it seems. Up there we go. Okay. My mom didn't wake me. My alarm clock sat on my dresser with no explanation for its failure to function. The clock only illuminated a blank stare with 8:17 written all over its face. While entirely robotic, I imagined the clock to have the dumbest possible expression, one complimenting its failure to behave any way outside its random glitch-infested nature. In the reflection of its plastic face, I could see myself unconsciously making the dumb expression I was imagining the clock to have. I laughed in my casual, dorky tone and began to get ready to leave home. Without breakfast, I left for school with a bogus note in hand to idealistically explain my tardiness. I think most of my teachers were too exhausted to worry about small variances in our appearance from time to time. With how low their pay was, I imagined there were very few rules most teachers cared about. It was another cold day in Lakewood. The wind hit my eyes, forcing tears to form in the corners as I sped along the sidewalk at a no doubt unreasonable speed. I passed Lauren and Raymond walking the opposite direction, no doubt headed towards the nearby church where all the students go to smoke, make out, and hide out till school ends. They seemed so childish as they held hands and smiled excitedly, as if they had gotten away with some tremendous crime. Mr. Hanson, my heavy-set, middle-aged history teacher, rolled his eyes as I walked into class. "James, talk to me after class," he said quickly, looking away from me, as if I were an undervalued employee who was barely important enough to make eye contact with, let alone deliver a full sentence to. "I have a note," I said. He ignored me, and continued his lecture on yet another topic that would not only be completely useless later in life, but wasn't even relevant for even a few seconds after the words left his mouth. There were only 15 minutes left in the class, but I felt it would be more stimulating to integrate myself into the room to yet again study my classmates' behavior than to sit in a hall watching the rows of scum-covered tiles inevitably slide off the decaying walls. For as long as I remember, I've enjoyed seeing how people move around and talk to each other, like they're all animals at the zoo. I would try to deliver a more accurate analogy if I felt there was one, but so many of them seemed incredibly unaware of themselves, just living lives as if they were some generic predefined routine. Sometimes, I felt like an alien who had a VIP pass to submerge myself into primitive human culture, just for entertainment. I sensed everything I can take in around me, the seemingly limitless audible tones, tremors in the voices of growing children rang in my ears. In studying people, I found myself gradually learning to literally feel the various personality types I encountered. I hyper-analyzed every inconsistent smell. The seemingly random clothing styles, freckles, and assorted hairstyles filled my mind with questions, trying to rationalize and understand what sequence of events led them to decide who they would become. I took favor of categorizing most everyone around me, the socially inept know-it-all, the dumb attention-seeking drama kid, and the bleached blonde bimbo who gets overly defensive at the slightest hint of criticism. Then there were the kids who just hoped no one noticed them at all. There was so much to be seen, to be considered and organized in my mind. Class had just ended, so I walked over to Mr. Hanson's desk and placed the tardy note down in passing. As I walked out with the rest of the class, he called after me. "James, we still need to talk." I responded, but continued to walk outside the room. "I have to be early to my next class. Let's talk tomorrow." I walked quickly down the hall towards my art class, which was awkwardly placed in a trailer outside my clearly poorly funded high school. On my way to the class, a fight had already broken out between two jocks who, no doubt, both had controlling, iron-fisted fathers who brainwashed them into believing conflicts between men are best resolved with the bloodying of their fists. These kind of men plagued my mind with wonder. I could not conceive a scenario in which they could justify their primitive and pointless mentalities, yet they would always continue to perpetuate their self-destructive attitudes, as if it offered the slightest legitimate benefit. Most everyone nearby crowded around the fight. None of them likely cared for who was winning, what it was about, or how far it went. All they ever seemed to show concern for was their own amusement, always excited to see violence without having to pull out their wallets to pay for it. As the sounds of flesh collided fist to cheek and chest, quickly followed the howls from the surrounding students. They would scream, "Oh!" as if it were sincerely delightful to witness creatures like themselves suffer and fall apart before their eyes. Even if I had time to stop, I never really took pleasure in seeing strangers hurt each other. Most all fights seemed avoidable, and were often initiated for a senseless reason. I know, you could say it's more complicated than that. I would like to think it were as well, but reality trumps the way I wish things would be. There's no sense in fighting it, when doing so rarely helps anyone. As I approached my next class, the image of Abby's face illuminated the neon walls of my mind like a projector, teasing a theater screening with fleeting moments of depth and purpose. Ever since I met her, she had occupied a part of my consciousness. Whenever I wasn't near her, I missed her to an unrealistic extent. You could call my longing sad, especially considering we had barely talked. She just had a strange effect on me, one no doubt similar to a willful addiction. There are people in life which you pass by on a daily basis, barely aware of their existence, but on an exceptionally rare occasion, you can find a person who fills an area inside your little world you didn't even realize needed filling. As I walked up the creaking stairs into my art class trailer, I could see Abby was sitting at her shared desk, alone, same makeup, hairstyle, and general appearance I had thought about repeatedly over the last couple days. She was drawing pictures on her blue-lined paper, distracting herself from the cold that filled the oddly glowing room. I smiled slightly, trying not to be too obvious, and sat down on my chilled metal chair positioned a few seats to the left and in front of her. Glancing over, I could see she hadn't moved at all. I wanted to inspire some acknowledgement of my existence from Abby, so I opened my mouth to greet her, when my fingers brushed up against freshly smeared gum under my desk. "Ew!" I shouted out on impulse. She looked up at me with a blank expression. Bursting into the room came a couple of boys. "Dude, I think John's done, bro." One of the other boys laughed, saying, "Heh, won't be seeing them for a week at least." I looked back at Abby, to see she also didn't react to their outburst. Strangely knowing that her apathy was generalized and impersonal gave me comfort. Her influence on how I felt was obviously dangerous, but I didn't care, as no matter how fond I was of the idea that I was not of this world, I knew my place and had no real interest in pretending otherwise. Jason, one of the boys energetically praising the fight they had just seen, sat in his seat next to Abby. I smirked, watching her shoulders shift away from him. Her body language sent a loud message that she had the same impression of Jason that I did. He was just another moron, placed on this earth to live his life completely unexamined, a pawn that had no awareness of its own role, let alone that it was just another tiny component within a massive, unstoppably twisted game. I know it sounds morbid and condescending, but my attitude was just something that naturally developed the more I studied human behavior. I would be more optimistic, but I find doing so would be like walking into a room with no windows and turning out the light. If you refuse to see the world around you for what it is, you're just wasting your eyes. Art class was about to begin. My teacher, Mrs. Stanley, who looked like she should have retired a ridiculous 30 years ago, approached the front of the room talking about how art is sacred. She also discussed the random objects she had us all draw the previous school day, and ironically graded it by using her own narrow-minded definition of art. I always wondered how teachers could even attempt objectively grading art. Is there any logic behind validating a form of self-expression using a cold black and white mathematical system? Today I'm going to place you with partners, Mrs. Stanley said, as she pulled out sheets of paper outlining our activities to come. To keep this simple, I'm going to partner you with the person you are currently assigned to share a desk with, she said. I sighed, knowing I was bound to be paired with Alex, a guy I had specifically asked to be seated away from, ever since he peed in a jar literally right next to me under our desk, acting like he was so cool for publicly exposing himself while simultaneously urinating. It happened weeks ago, and I still can't figure out what kind of crazy it takes for you to, in the presence of people you barely know, but have to see nearly on a daily basis, pee in a jar held in your hand just beneath your desk in the middle of a classroom. What then? You showed off like you would be praised and accepted, as if it were an accomplishment? Alex, despite being borderline mental, was one of my least favorite people to study. I couldn't help but feel there was some defect in his mind that invalidated the point of conducting a thorough analysis of him. He was completely irrelevant when considering the realities of normal human behavior. As I was off on a tangent in my own mind, I heard a familiar voice ring out, one that inspired the very same emotion you experience when a song you had forgotten you loved randomly plays in the background of your daily life. Can I be paired with James? Her voice was just as I remembered. Despite her having not spoken in class in some time, she hadn't changed a note. Abby had interrupted the teacher just to partner with me. But I asked myself if it was really just to work with me, or just to get away from Jason. The teacher, looking irritated, but understanding Abby's discomfort with Jason, responded, Alex and Jason, you'll be partners. James, switch seats with Jason. Thank you, Abby said with a slight smile. With a cocky grin, Jason stood up and in a comedic fashion smelled his armpit. Wow, I didn't know I smelled that bad, Jason said as he walked over to sit by Alex. Approaching Abby was no doubt a way scarier act in my mind than it was for everyone around me. I felt like my head was burning from the inside out. Nevertheless, I continued to remind myself that her public outcry to partner with me could have meant nothing. I already did that. I sat down next to her and did all I could to not turn to a complete dork on her. She reached out and grabbed the project outline that was being passed out. Mrs. Stanley began to read the description of the assignment. Today, you will both be taking something meaningful but expendable from your own home. Mrs. Stanley looked up and emphasized, that you own, then looked back down at her paper. You will tear these items apart here in class. You will then take those items and, using the adhesives, staples, and the strings available in class, find a way to create something new out of these possessions. She looked up and said in a low voice sounding somewhat like Dracula, Two will become one. Jason raised his hand objecting, All due respect, Mrs. Stanley. I'm not breaking something of mine for this class. She replied, putting her hands on her hips, That's fine, Jason. We'll supply you with toilet paper rolls. We have plenty of extras around here. Jason suddenly looked disturbed and sarcastically spouted, Freaking great. Mrs. Stanley asked, Are you sure? Your grades shouldn't suffer that much if you two just take Alex's piss jar and tape it to toilet paper roll. You're already failing this class. Jason couldn't believe what she had just said, and Alex maintained an awkward, frozen facial expression, with his mouth slightly open, in his normal weirdo, somewhat robotic fashion. Oh my God, Abby whispered under her breath, with a slight smirk. I grinned uncontrollably. Just seeing her amused was amazing to me. I could hear a scream in the back of my mind, reminding me my dorkiness and borderline obsession was escaping through my face. It's not that I couldn't help being in awe of Abby and basically every little thing she did. I simply didn't want to change how I felt. In a way, she was like your favorite song or book. You could pretend not to like it, and in time with the right mental coaching, maybe you would sincerely dislike it. But life just felt so much better embracing your condition entirely, letting all your nerdy admiration flow freely. Mrs. Stanley continued, If there's anyone else who has an issue, please take it up with my 1-800 number, which is... She put her hands in the air, signaling the students to react, but only a couple kids replied aloud with their catchphrase. 1-800, boo-hoo, they mumbled. She continued, Good. Now for the rest of the class, please work with your partner on what you plan to bring and draw up a prototype sketch of what you feel your final piece of art will look like. Mrs. Stanley walked to the back of her room and sat down at her 1950s looking rust infested. What the fuck? Mrs. Stanley walked to the back of her room and sat down at her 1950s looking rust infested desk. I would always laugh internally when I looked at the old thing. Maybe it was just my way of coping with the fact I attended one of the most rundown schools in the state. What are you going to bring, James? Abby asked. It was amazing hearing my name pass her lips, but I had no time to think. If I didn't respond right away, she would think I was totally awkward. I have no idea, I responded. Smiling, she said, I'm going to bring my hamster cage. I asked, did he die or something? She laughed. No, I never got one. The cage was just a gift from my dad. Your dad didn't get you a hamster for the cage? I asked. She paused and started to lose her smile. At the first sign of her smile fading, I felt a crushing pressure in my chest. Hopefully you can find something that will work with that, she said. I couldn't help but feel like a total jerk, despite not even knowing what I did wrong. I had the overwhelming urge to fix how she felt, so I took a gamble. Well, I could always bring that weird vibrating thing my mom hides in her drawers all wrapped up in a cloth, I said. She busted out laughing hysterically as a huge grin filled my face. I was so happy I could get her to smile again. Ew, James! She continued to laugh as the extent of my grin began to stress my cheeks. I couldn't remember a time when I was this obvious about how I felt. Abby's laughing trailed off and she paused. Turning to me, she said, You didn't actually. Your mom's? I responded, No. I wouldn't know about that, but I'm glad I made you laugh. She responded, returning to a soft laugh. You're more goofy than I thought, James. I sat next to her, looking at my fingers interlaced in front of me. My wide smile relaxed, but still filled my cheeks with warmth. As class came to a close, Abby patted me on my arm. I turned and she handed me a note. Instinctively, I put it in my pocket and said, See you tomorrow. She just smiled and walked away. On my way to my next class, I opened the note. I didn't understand why, but it read, Nice one. Not knowing what to make of it, and with little time, I stuffed it back in my pocket to look over later. Not feeling like skating home, I got on the bus to see all the normal rejects and misfits waiting. Davis, a short and scrawny kid who had been my best friend since middle school, despite being one grade behind me, excitedly waved me over. James, nice to see you, he said in seemingly the dorkiest way possible. I smiled as he stood up, giving me the window seat, knowing very well by then that I preferred it. As I sat down, I began looking out the window, analyzing the little humans running left and right to get on their buses. Something reached out and caught the corner of my eye. I immediately shifted my head to see what it was, and quickly realized it was Abby, standing in the parking lot by some beat-up sedan. What you looking at, James? Davis asked. Without hesitation, I began to respond, Oh, it's Abby. She's in my art. My heart sank as I witnessed a boy I barely knew, named Seth, walk up and kiss Abby on the lips. James? Davis said, but by that point, his voice was a faint echo in the darkness my mind instantaneously lost itself in. I felt like after a life of numbness, I was finally able to truly feel warmth for the first time, only to have it all taken away in an instant, leaving me hopeless in the shadows, alone once again. I looked down at my knees, feeling as if I had lost all muscle control in my neck. Are you okay? Davis asked. I responded with hesitation, I'm just stupid. No, you're not. You're one of the coolest guys I know, Davis replied. I continued my silence as he offered words of encouragement. Okie dokie. Well, you're awesome and should be super happy, so if you want to talk, I'm your buddy. So here I am to talk. I was too focused on the conflict raging in my mind to hear anyone at that point. I couldn't think about anything but Seth kissing Abby the entire trip home. That night, my mom was literally just serving lentil beans she prepared on her crock pot for the billionth time. A fair exaggeration, but still, it was excessive to say the least. My sister was behaving as she usually did at the dinner table, talking about how stupid she thought school was and how she couldn't wait for college. "How was work, Mom?" I asked, trying to keep my mind off the haunting images looping in my mind. "Well, no one at work respects me or listens to me, and I generally can't stand it, but, we still have food on the table," she said in a stern tone. My sister barked as food flew out of her mouth. "Well, at least it's not high school. I'm learning how to be a successful person from a bunch of low-income losers," my mom replied. "Whatever your teachers are, they have full-time jobs, which is more than a lot of people can say." My mom gave my sister Lisa a disappointed look. Lisa was well known for showing little respect for hard-working people. To her, it didn't matter how much you gave back to society. It only mattered how much money you make. After the rerun of lentil soup, I washed the dishes per my mother's orders and headed to the shower. I sat on the floor of the tub thinking about Abby, barely feeling the water as it hit my chest. I was so consumed with what I had seen that I had completely forgotten the note until that moment. I quickly reached over to my pants resting on the toilet. I had hoped I read it wrong the first time, and that it would make more sense with a second look, only to see it read exactly what I gathered in my initial passing glance. "Nice one," I mumbled to myself. I joked with the idea in my head that she had handed me the wrong note, but still assumed it wasn't a failed attempt to say "nice one," which could be taken as a compliment if you were desperate enough. Seconds into looking at the note, my eyes widened. Having figured out what it meant, I jumped up, slipping to my feet and screamed, "Yeah!" I had cracked it, only to immediately after feel completely stupid for having not figured it out sooner. My mom screamed through the door from her bedroom. "What?" I responded, "Sorry, nothing." I hurried to finish showering. Staring at my phone wearing only a towel, I smiled as I typed in "nice one" or 647-3663 into the number keys. I assumed we shared the same area code. Otherwise, she likely would have given me a longer sequence of letters, and I was right. After 2 rings, I got an answer. "What do you want?" a disgruntled man's voice asked, like a bad engine struggling to start in a monster movie. I clumsily belted out a response. I was looking for..." An unenthusiastic female voice in the background said, "Give me the phone." "Whatever," he said, dropping the phone in front of her. "Hello?" I could recognize the voice. Now it was Abby. Trying to hide my excitement by maintaining a normal tone, I said, "This is James." Abby excitedly screamed and responded, "Oh my God, you figured it out!" Hearing her optimistic tone, I laughed, saying, "So, why..." She interrupted, "I was hoping to find out if you figured out what you were bringing to art class." I said, "Oh," and looked quickly around my room. I couldn't see anything immediately, so I just said, "I'll surprise you." She then replied, "Oh, come on, tell me." My eyes looked on for a plausible item for the project. "How about my bear? I'll bring my bear," I said. She replied, "Oh, okay, oh, I have an idea. Instead of the cage, I'll bring in a stuffed animal of mine and we'll make like a zombie bear." I laughed. "Awesome," I said. "Okay, I'll see you tomorrow, okay?" She replied happily. I answered, "Okay, bye." Just before she hung up, I could still hear her laughing, leaving me with a sense of accomplishment and a lasting smile as if it were painted across my face. And that, everybody, is the first chapter of Stones to Abbigale. So far, the word errors are not too bad. Actually, I'm mentally correcting the word errors. Like, let's go back to a sentence here for a second. Like, let's see this. I joked with the idea in my head that she handed me the wrong note, but still assumed it wasn't a failed attempt to say "nice one." You know that line? Until it says "nice one," there's not a comma, guys. There's not a comma until it says "nice one." That whole thing, there was not a single comma. I had a lot of word pauses because that's how normal speech works. You pause. There are no commas in this. Second off, this girl is pretty stock so far. I don't know. Maybe she'll get more interesting. Maybe this guy will get more interesting. The main character's not too bad so far. Jocks are a little bit stereotypical, but I guess they'll get a little bit more to them. So far, it's not the worst. I mean, if anyone judged this book based on the first 17 pages, I don't think it'd be very good. The only thing I can judge so far is that this guy does not like commas, apparently. I mean, he uses some, like, more in some areas than is necessary, but in other areas he just completely forgets that commas exist. So, when we come back next time for more Stones to Abbigale, we're going to read Chapter 2. And we'll do that. So, see you guys for that next time. Have a good one, y'all. Hello, Windows Script Host. How you doing?